Men often find themselves blindsided by a culture that hates authentic masculinity, and many have given in and succumbed to the ever-evolving culture and woke society. But not us. We are the Remnant, faithful Catholic men from 3 different generations who reach through the radio to tackle current events that challenge our wills and empower the practice of the Catholic faith through thought-provoking discernment and prayer. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed and bombarded, it's time to turn your radio up and join us for The Remnant on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Remnant Show here on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network. I am Bill Snyder, and it's wonderful to be with you. And as always, I'm joined by my good friends Stephen Thomas and Ray Haywood. And on tonight's show, we're going to be talking about free will. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that the Remnant Show is sponsored by the Fraternity of St. Joseph's Men's Group. Visit fsjjourneyman.com to review the easy-to-follow resource documents and consider starting a chapter of the FSJ Journeyman in your parish today. So, Ray, Stephen, how are we tonight? Looking forward to this wonderful topic of free will.
I'm stoked to talk about this stuff, man.
Yeah, there's so much. There's just so much to cover in this time in fellowship. I'm actually going to bring some things into the conversation that we're not going to cover, but I think that they're important for us to discuss. That's how much there is when it comes to this topic.
Go for it, Ray. I know you always have so much wisdom, so you're up first.
The old guy. All right. Okay, the tagline for the Remnant Show reads, "Join the Remnant Show as their hosts tackle current events that challenge our wills and our Catholic faith through 3 generations of thought-provoking discernment." Well, in this episode, we will do just that, challenge our wills. So let's get right into it. I want to share a snippet of chapter 2 from the book Tools to Ready the Journey, A Father's Guide to a Faith-Filled Family. And that chapter is titled, "Our Thoughts Are Not Our Own." It mostly talks about free will. So here we go, all right? Free will allows us to choose our own direction in our physical life. Our free will allows us to choose or reject a relationship with God in our spiritual life. We must be aware that we have this freedom to choose. We must also be aware that the enemy, the devil, knows this fact all too well. Satan knows it's easier to tempt to vice than to embrace virtue. As humans, created in the image and likeness of God, we have an innate sense of right and wrong. As sinners, we are inclined to submit to vice. Satan seeks to encourage that inclination. After generations of this moral relativistic, boy, that's a word, huh? Relativistic behavior, we have almost completely removed God from our society. Was this all of our own free will? Have we been duped? As smart people, our societal perception is that we no longer require the crutch of God or religion. We use our free will to determine for ourselves what is true in this finite world. So many people feel that way. Isn't it just sad realization? We choose to become the gods of our own physical universe. We choose to define our own system of right and wrong and have learned how to rationalize this in our accepted sinful mindset. Yet Satan has succeeded at chipping away at the moral fiber in this world to the point where there is little work left for him to do to capture, to own our souls for all eternity. To serve as an example of how moral relativism eats away at our free will, I'm going to call on C.S. Lewis's passage in the Screwtape Letters. I mean, listen, anybody who's actually read C.S. Lewis's work, it's not an easy thing to read. You have to read a chapter, then reread it. It's just wild, but so worth the outcome of spending that effort. So here we go. From the Screwtape Letters. To set the stage, the senior demon Screwtape explains to his novice demon nephew, Wormwood, Yet another tool to illustrate how to steal the soul of a man. In this letter, Screwtape refers to God, the source of all truth, as the enemy. Screwtape reveals that his preferred weapon of mass destruction against man, whom he calls the patient, is fear, vice, and pride. So here's the letter. My dear Wormwood, think of your man as a series of concentric circles, his will being the innermost, his intellect coming next, and finally, his fantasy. You can hardly hope at once to exclude from all the circles everything that smells like the enemy, but you must keep shoving all the virtues outward till they are all finally located in the circle of fantasy, and all the desirable qualities inward into the will. It is only insofar as they reach the will and are there embodied that the virtues are rarely there to defeat us. I don't, of course, mean that the patient mistakes for his will the conscious fume and fret of resolutions and clenching of teeth, but the real center, what the enemy calls the heart. All sorts of virtues painted in fantasy or approved by the intellect, or even in some measure loved and admired, will not keep a man from our Father's house. Indeed, they may make him more amusing when he gets there. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Pretty powerful, no? So to take a moment to picture the three circles in your head and lock in that vision. Think about those three circles, right? And now let's consider applying this concept as we identify all the information we process in our lives. The first and innermost circle, our will, is our heart. Whatever settles here is our foundation. Our foundation, our innermost circle, is impenetrable if it is formed with virtue that leads us to God. The second circle is our intellect, our reasoning, which can be swayed if the innermost circle is not yet fully shaped and guided by decisions made in moral posture. The third circle, fantasy, is where our free will is most easily compromised, where thoughts of truth and honor are challenged easily. Living in and of this world leads us to question God. The prevailing cultural belief that we are smarter than the truth becomes the accepted morality for those who have permitted their free will to operate predominantly within the realm of fantasy. Just think about that for a minute. How many people do we know that actually just, they operate their lives in this outer circle of fantasy? They believe nothing. They don't know how to come into that objective truth without removing the feelings and seeing things objectively, you know? Within this posturing, we lack the humility to acknowledge God as the source of all truth, goodness, and beauty. We become incapable, therefore, of discerning what is real or virtuous, as our cultural norms become more and more palatable with each new generation. Without faith in God and the realization of his truth, no other truth can be reasoned. For the faithful, seeing truth in the world is easy. The faithful direct their intellect and reasoning toward truth, which leads to the clarity of virtue, which settles firmly in their will, our hearts. This strong foundation, this true will, enables the faithful to live through life's challenges with a clear perspective of the eternal truth, which is not a concept, but our loving Father. In this light of truth, everything is seen with clear eyes. So, you know, there's a lot that was just placed there with those circles. I encourage anybody who hasn't read Screwtape Letters to take a moment out to do that and to step closer to the path in it. When it comes to free will, as far as I'm concerned, our thoughts are not our own. And this world actually gives us situational truths, especially the younger generation who's, you know, living in and of this world today, who don't know of good intent. There's no reflection of good intent out there in our secular. It's just sad, but I don't want to leave on a bad note. So within my own faith walk, My free will is what gives me those guiding graces that, gives me the will to make those good decisions and have those good results that mirror and reflect well into my family. What do you think, Stephen?
Man, there's just so much there. I love the emphasis on virtue and vice, and I think that's just so crucially important, especially. I don't think that the cultural norms of the day like to think in terms of morality. So it's very important that we recognize the intersections between theology and cultural norms, or political norms. And as a student of political philosophy, it's really quite cool for me, honestly, to be able to take my Catholic faith life and kind of look and see where the cultural norms got off the rails, and you can really trace it back several centuries to the Enlightenment and all of that. And it's, I get to teach that stuff too, so it's even more incredible to be able to pass that on, and do one small part for a few young minds. So to get into free will, I thought back to my undergraduate thesis was about tyranny, and how tyranny is fundamentally unjust because the one in power, the tyrant, assumes power or maintains it by unjust means. One of the chapters of my thesis was about St. Augustine's political writings. So, more talking about the intersection between politics and theology. They are there. He had a key phrase, libido dominandi, which is Latin for lusting for power. Now, St. Augustine wrote in his magnum opus, the City of God, quote, "Thus a good man, though a slave, is free, but a wicked man, though a king, is a slave. For he serves not one man alone, but what is worse, as many masters as he has vices." Close quote. In this context, libido dominandi means to be dominated by the lust to dominate. It shows us how precarious our human situation is, for we become what we engage in. Our habits make us who we are. It may be initially pleasant to engage in immediate gratification, but bit by bit, we surrender our free will. So that's those cultural norms for you are all about immediate gratification. We will continue to fall until we hit rock bottom, where we are at the total mercy of our appetites. And in that way, we become no better than beasts, and we reject the gift of sentience and reason that God gives us as higher beings in creation. No other creature thinks as we do. And when we enslave ourselves to those base appetites, we throw that away. This reveals the truth that God's moral law really has what is truly best for us in mind with its tenets. They lead us to the best life. How do we follow it then? When I thought about how to answer that, I came up with this. Through voluntarily and with all humility, admitting our own concupiscent and inborn sinful nature, and professing our dependence on God and his infinite mercy. Now, not everyone may be called to the harsh penances of the ascetics of our history, such as the Desert Fathers living out this truth, but all people are called to righteousness. Now, righteousness not only means to live a moral life in the general sense. Everybody should strive to be good, but it means more than that. It means to conform our own will to the will of God, so that we can be free ourselves of sins, so that we may love God and our neighbor more perfectly, and one day be in perfect union with God, his angels, and his saints in heaven, which is what God wants as the ultimate end for us all. Bill, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think you guys have just nailed it, right? And there's so much to unpack inside free will. But I really like, Stephen, how you spoke about this relationship of love and the fact that God has gifted us with an intellect that is like no other creature, right? This rationality, this rational being that we are. And it actually reminds me, this whole conversation reminds me of a question in our latest book at Patchwork Heart Ministry, Hearts Burning Within Us, when some of the students asked, why does God let bad things happen in our world? Right? Why does God, in his infinite goodness, allow bad things to happen? When, I said it comes down to love. And then I followed that statement up with not only love, but love is dependent on freedom. And if you don't have freedom, you can't have love. And if you really think about it, you have to choose. Love is a choice to love somebody. I mean, I think we see it most profoundly in the sacrament of holy matrimony, right? Like that's on full display in the rite of marriage. Do you freely take this person? Do you freely take this person? Yes, absolutely. But then it stretches beyond that too. Well, okay, why does God let bad things happen in our world? And it begs a question like this coronavirus pandemic or these hurricanes or tornadoes or whatever. Why does God allow this to happen? Well, as you kind of alluded to, creation follows our lead, right? If you remember back to the Garden of Eden, God says that we have dominion over all creatures. And that means that, we were to set the example to guide all of creation in a path of righteousness, right? Like it was created for us to live beautifully in harmony. And the moment we rebelled, creation and nature rebelled along with it, or along with us. So I just want you to think when you think about free will, think about the repercussions of sin in that light. Think about the repercussions of sin in that context, because when you realize that the choice to love gives you greater freedom, right? When you make that choice to love one another, you grow in harmony with God, and you grow closer to God and his heart. And when you don't, not only do you separate yourself, but sin has a ripple effect over all of creation. And so, just think about those things and how it relates to free will. That would be my thoughts on it. We have to take a very short break here on The Remnant. We'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned to the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, my name is Bill Snyder. I am one of the hosts of The Remnant here on the Carolina Catholic Media Network, and I am also the founder and president of Patchwork Heart Ministry. I want to take a brief moment and tell you a story about why life is important to me. I was in college at the University of Scranton when a professor in a course called Jews, Christians, and the Bible, who happened to be a rabbi, waited until the very last day of our class to make a point. He said that Jews and Catholics believe something different about the sanctity of life. He said if a child cannot live a normal life, that you can approach the rabbi and get permission to terminate the pregnancy. He had absolutely no idea that I was sitting in his class and that I had had 2 open heart surgeries at the time. I've now had 3. I raised my hand and I said to him, "Excuse me, what is my grade point average in this class?" And he gave it to me. And then I said, "Okay, do you believe that I am able to live a normal life and function?" He goes, "Of course." I said, "Well, do you know that I've had 2 open heart surgeries? Would you consider at the beginning of my life terminating it because I don't have a normal heart?" and he was stunned. He stammered for a while, had absolutely nothing to say other than class dismissed. I knew that as I walked out of that classroom, that I had not only made an impact in his life and spirituality, but I had also impacted the lives of other students listening to my witness. This is Respect Life Month. I strongly encourage each and every one of you to defend life and witness to the beauty of all lives. May God bless you and your families.
Welcome back to The Remnant on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
All right, guys, welcome back to The Remnant. So our saint for today is Pope St. John Paul II, and he is a great fit for the segment on free will, given his long fight against totalitarianism. His contribution to Western civilization during one of the most tumultuous centuries the world has ever seen is essential to the utmost degree. He showed strength in the face of adversity and gave hope to millions behind the Iron Curtain. On a more profound level, communism represented a dark ideological specter that is the enemy of Christianity and the enemy of human dignity. Now, Pope John Paul II was able to consolidate social capital and, in working with other world leaders in the free world, work to bring down the Eastern Bloc and give millions back their freedom. Now, Ray, what are your thoughts on Pope St. John Paul II?
I'm going to build on what you just shared. So for Pope John Paul II, freedom in the physical realm and the gift of free will in our spiritual realm are very much connected. From his priestly ordination in 1946 through his consecration as bishop in 1958 to his election as pope in 1978, Pope John Paul lived under constant surveillance by communist leaders. Even priests of his diocese served as informants. That's pretty wild to think about. So when we think about this, this is the first layer in Pope John Paul II's understanding of freedom. Let's be intentional in our understanding that his writings do not come from academia. They don't come from books, from theory. They come from a place of wisdom that only life's lessons could share for him. There's so much more to speak about when we talk about Pope St. John Paul II. So, Bill, what do you have for us?
I want to just share a story from his life that I remember. I'll forget it. I was in college at the time, and it was witnessing his death. And I remember being in theology class, watching St. John Paul's life come to an end, where it was I walked into my theology class and the TV was on and they had made the announcement that John Paul II had passed away. And a few days later came his funeral. And I remember watching this incredible moment in world history, as Stephen, you kind of said, he is such an amazing figure that I couldn't help but really echo that, or see how his life embodied that beautiful quote that he talked about with freedom. Freedom consists not in doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought. And that's an amazing quote for many, many reasons. But he truly lived it. He lived that quote. I remember that one of his biographers was talking about that he really wrestled with resigning as Pope at a period in his life. He was free to do that. He could have. I mean, his successor did. But John Paul, as he prayed about it, he knew that was not the will of God for his life, and he obeyed that. And he had amazing freedom and an amazing touch on the world. So with that, I want to roll into my ReMENant challenge for you. And I want you to think about your death, right? And because free will is one of those opportunities my dad often likes to say, you know, at moments in your life, that you're feeling down, or you're feeling like you haven't lived up, or you haven't done your best in life, you know, think about your death. The Knights of Columbus used that phrase, you know, memento mori, right? Remember your death. And free will is something that each moment in our life we get to exercise, right? Some more powerfully than others as these moments encounter us. But one thing that I think keeps us toward that side of virtue, like we talked about earlier, is when we remember our death and remember our ultimate goal is to get to heaven. And remember that the ultimate penalty is not getting to heaven, being separated from God for eternity. And that, I think, gives us an impetus to choose well. You know, to steal a line from Indiana Jones, right? He chose wisely. Well, choose wisely. And so, Stephen, I'll toss it to you.
Oh gosh, I love that. I love that. That makes me think society really has, you know, lost the art of dying, and we're scared of it. We want to sanitize our lives from it. So maybe that could be a future topic. But my ReMENant today is short and sweet. And all I want you to do is have an awareness in your life over the next week to uphold the freedom of others. Try to be a servant to others in that regard, so that you lead by example and use your free will in the service of God's will and fulfill that specific call that God gives to men. Ray, what's your ReMENant for us today?
So for my ReMENant challenge this week, I would like to bring up the notion of willing things to happen. When I was an adolescent Catholic, I used to think I was able to push through things. I still say to my sons, push through it when they come to face life's challenges. Looking back now, I see things differently. I come to this awareness only through life's lessons learned and through the awareness that I've always had a forgiving heart. In understanding this knowledge and humility, I now know that God's hand was always in my life, and that I wasn't only pushing through the challenges here in my physical life, but I was also willing things to happen in my unwitting adolescent spiritual life. I know that what I'm suggesting here is not easy to follow, especially for an adolescent Catholic, but I believe that for some of our listeners, I'm making them aware of something that they already know. Going back to that Rocky Balboa opening that we had. What I'm suggesting is that in a world that is consistently placing wedges and stumbling blocks in our path to compromise our wills, discernment of my notion of willing things to happen can help us to become steadfast in our convictions towards fighting the good fight as we continually chip away at working out our salvation. I hope that someday my sons can share in this same understanding. I know wholeheartedly that willing it to happen is a real thing for the morally intentional journeyman. But before we can fully understand the powerful gift of our free will, we need to become steadfast in our convictions. Those guiding principles that direct the actions of a faithful mindset toward not doing what we like, but in doing what we ought. Looking back now, I know that God has always had a plan for my life. It's beautiful to now be a part of that plan through understanding the powerful gift of my free will. In a conversation I had in preparing for this episode, I was told that St. Thomas Aquinas has been quoted for having to have said, "If you want to love God, will it to happen." I think St. Thomas Aquinas and I may have shared a similar understanding of this notion. So, Bill?
My gosh, we totally packed in a ton of information into this episode, folks. So I really do encourage you that if you've missed any portion of this episode, to go back and listen to it on the podcast feed of Carolina Catholic Radio. And don't forget, you can download the Carolina Catholic Radio app to your phone on both Android and Apple. So take some time to listen to us on the go as well. But for all of us here at the ReMENant and the Carolina Catholic Radio Network, may God bless you and your families.
Thank you for joining the ReMENant today. For more information about us, email theremnantshow@gmail.com That's the ReMenant show at gmail.com.